Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm here today to try to help you find a thing called the truth. You're going to hear two different stories today. You're going to hear a story from the defendant, and you're going to hear a story from the plaintiff. And it is your job, and I have full confidence in you, that you will be able to look beyond the differences in those two stories and find the truth. And the way you can do that is by looking to the facts. Do the facts line up? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you the story of what happened on December the 7th, 1996. I'm going to tell you the plaintiff's side of the story, and I'm going to tell you the defendant's side of the story, and I'm going to give you the facts. And I'm going to ask you to objectively look at the facts and make the right decision. I have full confidence. On December the 7th, 1996, the officers, Officer Levy, Officer Waldman, the defendants in this case, were traveling down a one-lane road. They're going about 10 miles an hour or less. On the other side of town, there was the plaintiff, Mr. Ramirez, and he was hanging out with his friends. They were having a good time, they were watching the game, had a few beers, and they decided they'd go out later. They decided, well, we'll hit a few bars, and they had a little more to drink. After that, they were still feeling good, obviously not drunk, because they decided they were going to go to a ball field and run around and run some races and just have a good time. So they ran over there and they ran some races and just, yeah, had a good time with some of their friends. And then Mr. Ramirez looked at the time, he said, you know what, time's getting away, I need to get home. I need to get back to my family. So he got in his car and he started out going home. And he was in a hurry, and he got behind this car, which I've previously mentioned, which Officer Levy and Officer Waldman were driving, and they were still going about 10 miles per hour or less. Mr. Ramirez honked the horn, he swerved, tried to get around him, and not only did this car not pull over, they swerved in front of Mr. Ramirez and cut him off. Mr. Ramirez thought there must be some mistake. So he honked his horn and he swerved again to try to get around him and get home. This car swerved again. In a very provocative manner, they cut him off and kept Mr. Ramirez from passing them for no apparent reason. Shortly thereafter, the two officers turned down a side street. Mr. Ramirez decided, well, you know what, I'm going to investigate, see what's going on with these guys. Why are they cutting me off? So he followed them. The officers then pulled off, and Mr. Ramirez pulled up parallel next to them. And he got out and said, what's going on? Why are you cutting me off? At this point, Officer Levy got out of the car. And one very important fact that's undisputed by any of the parties here is that the police car that the officers were driving was unmarked, and that neither of the officers in the car were dressed in uniform. They were unidentified officers. That is a fact that is undisputed. And ladies and gentlemen, at the time this unmarked police officer got out of his car, he did not announce that he was an officer. Instead of announcing he was an officer, instead of alleviating the situation before it ever began and sending Mr. Ramirez on his way with a simple explanation, Mr. Levy got into a fight with Mr. Ramirez. Got into a fight on his official duties as a police officer. He got into a fight for no apparent reason. They tussled around to the ground, and suddenly at some point, Officer Levy decided it'd be a good idea to announce that he's a police officer. So Officer Levy said, stop, police. At that point, Mr. Ramirez stopped fighting. They'd been rolling around on the ground. Mr. Ramirez was on the ground. And just as he was about to get up, he told Mr. Levy, say, look, can you please give me some identification? How do I know you're a police officer? Please show me some ID. So the officers, instead of showing him some ID, Mr. Waldman gets out of the car, comes up behind him, and boom, he shoots him in the back for no apparent reason. Mr. Ramirez was no longer resisting. In fact, he was on the ground, just getting up, had no weapons in his hand, was not threatening any type of force. And Mr. Waldman just shoots him. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to ask you if that is reasonable force. Ladies and gentlemen, the law requires that in order to use deadly force, in order for a police officer to draw his revolver, there must be good cause, there must be reasonableness, and it must be without malice. Ladies and gentlemen, this officer shot Mr. Ramirez in the back when he was down on the ground. You know, there's an age-old adage that says, you don't kick someone when they're down. Ladies and gentlemen, this literally happened. He was shot in the back for no apparent reason. Now the officers, on the other hand, are going to tell you the story. They're going to tell you, well, they found a knife. They're going to tell you, well, Officer Levy was stabbed and he was sent to the hospital. Ladies and gentlemen, there's nothing in the record that tells you Officer Levy was stabbed. The only thing in the deposition, in the testimony so far, and the only thing that they will testify again in the actual trial, is that Mr. Levy had a small cut wound. That's what the medical record actually said. He had a small cut wound, which they treated him for. Ladies and gentlemen, that cut wound could have come from anything. That cut wound could have come from a rock. It could have come from a day earlier. There's no evidence that says it was a knife. Furthermore, the knife that they claim they found at the scene, the knife that they claim was the weapon, the deadly weapon that was used to stab Officer Levy, was closed, had no fingerprints on it, and didn't as much have a speck of blood on the knife. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to ask you, does it sound like the truth to you that a knife that is closed with no fingerprints and no blood was somehow a knife that was used to stab someone? Ladies and gentlemen, you tell me if that sounds like the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, you tell me if it sounds reasonable for police officers to cut someone off who's trying to pass them. You tell me if it's reasonable for a police officer not to identify himself. You tell me if it's reasonable for a police officer to engage in a fight instead of alleviating a situation. You tell me if it's reasonable for a police officer to shoot someone who's down. You tell me if it's reasonable for an officer to shoot someone who's not even armed. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ramirez has been consistent through all of his testimony, and will be consistent again today. He has never seen that knife. He does not own that knife, and his wife will back up his story as well. His wife recognizes all of his knives, and he does not own the type of knife that these officers claim they found at the scene. These officers claim they found a jackknife. One of those knives you have to push down a button and close. They claim they found that. Mr. Ramirez does not own that kind of knife. He has been consistent. Whereas the officers have been very inconsistent in their stories. Officer Levy claimed he saw the knife the minute Ramirez got out. Mr. Waldman claims he very clearly did not see the knife, and he would have seen the knife when Mr. Ramirez got out. They claimed that Mr. Ramirez was right with his right hand, was fixing to stab Levy again. However, Mr. Ramirez is left-handed. They will tell you many different versions of this story that are inconsistent with one another, whereas Mr. Ramirez has been consistent all along. Furthermore, Dr. Angrist, who is an experienced doctor, will tell you that the angle on which the bullet went into and entered Mr. Ramirez suggests that he was shot from a downward angle, thus completely backing up the story that Mr. Ramirez was on the ground attempting to get up at the time he was shot. Well, ladies and gentlemen, all I'm here to do is to ask you to evaluate the facts and to reach the most likely conclusion based on the truth. Is it possible to stab someone with a knife that is closed? Is it possible to stab someone with a knife without leaving any blood on it? Is it possible to stab someone with a knife without leaving fingerprints? All the while being shot. You tell me what the truth is.